it always amazes me, this alchemy, when the different gifts come together. It makes something bigger than the whole. And we've talked about that as a way that this church works also. So today, as we remember St. Francis of Assisi, and that first hymn that we sang was basically the Canticle of the Sun in musical form. And we celebrate the blessing of the animals, which we'll do in just a few minutes. I want to extend Paul's ideas beyond people to animals. The idea that our animals have different gifts also. Not all dogs are exactly the same. Those of you who have dogs know, and especially if you've had more than one, some of them are really, really special. If Jan were here, she'd tell us about Andy. Denise will tell us, I'm sure, about Dora. And the same is true of cats. Oh my gosh. Suzanne's Romeo. I mean, she's had cats forever, but the one that she has now is just super special. So I want to share a particular example of an animal gift this morning because it's so unusual. I'm a big fan of a British scientist named Rupert Sheldrake, who wrote this great book called Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. He was fascinated with this phenomenon, and you may have observed it. The dog that just pops up and goes right to the door or the window or the gate or wherever and waits, and pretty soon their owner shows up. And you can't figure out how the dog knew that their owner was coming home. Well, so Sheldrake decided to actually investigate this. He lives in England. He put out an ad in the paper to owners who thought their pets were psychic in this way, that with no explanation, they knew when somebody was coming home. So he got about 500 people who answered this ad, and a bunch of them, it was related to or you could relate it to the time of day. It's like my husband always takes the 5:10 train. He always gets home at 6:15, and you know that dogs know how to tell time, right? Yeah, you should be around my daughter's house. That's her dog. At 5 o'clock, which is when they get fed, they know what time it is, like to the minute. Daylight savings time really messes with them. It's very sad. But so some of them were in that category. Some of them you could explain with their acute sense of hearing. They knew when the family car turned the corner into their street because they could hear it, right? So he weeded out ones with explanations, and he was still left with a handful of dogs that there just wasn't a simple explanation for how they knew when their owners were coming home. So he did the full-on experiment. He had the owners keep track of, do a time track of every stage. When I decided to come home, when I got on the train or in the car, when I hit the town limit, when I turned into our street, just track the whole thing. And he had somebody else at home watching the dog. When did the dog get restless? When did the dog go to the window? Da, 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 da. And he puts these two lists next to each other, and he made a very surprising discovery. The times that matched up when the dog went to the window or the door or the gate was when the owner first thought about coming home. When the intention was formed in their mind, now it's time to go home. Before they'd actually physically done anything, even if they're headed out the office door and somebody says, oh, can you look at this before you go? So they're a little late, the dog knew. Even if they had a different vehicle, the dog knew. It was when they decided to start home. It's essentially telepathy. Oh, that's a pretty amazing gift. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So they know we're talking about them, right? Yeah. Sheldrake used it as an example of what he calls morphic fields, which are, it's a field, the idea is it's a field like electromagnetic field or a magnetic field. It's just a thought field. And thoughts travel in this field if you're sensitive to them. Some people are, and apparently some dogs are. He even found some human examples of this phenomenon. There is in rural Norway the idea of and I don't speak Norwegian, so I don't know what to do with the O and the line through it, but the word looks like Vardiger, and it means warning soul. And here's the idea. Those of you who live with someone else know that there's a certain sequence of sounds when that person comes into the house. You know, how loudly they close the front door, what their footsteps sound like. They go to the coat closet first, you know, just there's a normal sequence of sounds. So much so that if somebody else walked into your house, you would know it immediately. With this warning soul, people hear the sounds before the person actually gets there. It's as if, again, the person has an intention to come home, and the signs of their arrival get there before they do. That's something that's, I mean, telepathy of some sort. He uses it again as this example of a morphic field. We saw it in the Kent Nearburn books that the book group had been reading a few months ago. The old one, Benace, that they met way out in the North Woods, knew that Dan was coming to visit him before he got there. How did he know? He was sensitive to something that we aren't. So the reason for expanding this idea of gifts is to let ourselves be beyond just human at the pinnacle of creation, like everything else is less than. It's really much more that we all beings have gifts, and none are really better or more important than others. And in fact, telepathy is sometimes an example of what people anticipate when the human species evolves, that we will get to a point where our communications can be telepathic. And here we've got dogs doing it already. So all of the gifts matter. All of them are important. The human gifts and the animal gifts. So it feels like it would give us the potential of a different attitude toward nature, toward the earth, toward our use of the earth, to see ourselves as one of the players and not the absolute pinnacle. A basket of gifts, not a hierarchy of them. So I'll bet those of you with dogs and cats especially have some stories about special gifts of animals that you have lived with. Anybody have one you'd like to share?